So, in the last lecture, we talked about the sort of case for police discretion. And I think there is a powerful case for it. In fact, I think this is one of the things that makes this a really interesting issue is that there's some deep worries about it, which we'll talk about in this lecture. There's also a really good case for it. It's just not clear what to do. Those are always make the sort of best philosophical issues, right? But anyway, so last lecture we talked about the argument for discretion. In the next couple lectures, I want to talk about some, well, I don't know if it would be fair to quite call them arguments against discretion, but at the very least, they're worries about police discretion. And I think one worry you should think about right off the bat is just how much Del Pozo is asking from individual police officers. Look, I don't think it's unrealistic to expect an individual police officer not to do something blatantly racist, right? I don't think it's unreasonable, unrealistic to ask an individual police officer not to hassle people because they're poor or whatever, they look different, right? But Del Pozo is asking a whole lot more than that. Think of the Starbucks officers, right? I mean, I don't want to be too sympathetic to these people, but think of this, right? You're called by the Starbucks. Now you have to adjudicate, would Starbucks have called the police on these people if they were white? Well, if they wouldn't, what's my right response here as a police officer? Obviously, do I leave, and if they haven't bought something in an hour, then we go somewhere else? Do I, it's very, very complicated. Think about what this imposes on each individual police officer when they're enforcing traffic laws, right? Is the police officer supposed to, I don't know, keep a log of every car he pulls over and make sure there's not, some kind of income, discrimination? How is he supposed to make sure that he's being fair from a racial angle? If the department as a whole asks him to enforce drug laws in a certain way, does he have to then ask these grand questions about social policy and treating everyone fairly? I mean, look, the kinds of things that Del Pozo and discretion generally seem to be asking police officers to do, if discretion is to fit with the ideals of liberalism, they're the kinds of things we ask judges and juries to do, but we ask judges and juries to do them when they have hours to deliberate. And judges, at least, are trained for years in the law. Do police officers, and this is no insult to police officers, do they have the training to do that? To think of these grand questions of liberalism and law and political philosophy that Del Pozo would throw onto them? I mean, Del Pozo has a PhD. Maybe he can. Is it fair to ask the average cop to do that, though? But if the average cop can't do that, is discretion going to fit with this ideal of liberalism? Even Del Pozo, right, in the heat of the moment, is he going to, is somebody like with a PhD going to be able to apply these principles in the way that he wants to? If your answer is no, my point here isn't to fault the police, but my point here is if the answer is no, then you have to worry if discretion can really be made to fit with liberalism in the way that Del Pozo wants it to. If police can't do these very big things that he's asking from them, then we might really worry whether discretion is going to fit, especially with these ideas of treating people equally and fairly, and with not advancing a certain conception of the good life. Let me say some more about those worries. By its very nature, police discretion opens the door to unfairness, to the law being applied differently to different people, and applied differently to different people for reasons that are not reasons that fit in with justice. Right? If I have the flu, that might be a good reason to cut me some slack with the traffic laws, right? If the same cop who pulls me pulls a friend of mine a day later, and he says to the cop, well, hey, you let Sam Duncan off, right? He was doing 45 through here. And the cop says, yeah, but why were you doing 45? And it's like, well, I just wasn't paying attention. If he says, well, he had the flu, you just couldn't be bothered to look at the signs, good reason to let him off, not let you off, right? That does not seem unfair to me, right? Something horrible happened to them, or, they have an emergency, all of those seem to be reasons to go easy on them or not to just enforce the law, right? But discretion allows police to use it in different ways. And police officers are human beings. So I think they will use it in different ways. Let me give you guys an example. My mom, when it comes to talking her way out of tickets, is if you guys have ever seen Star Wars, she's like Obi-Wan Kenobi with stormtroopers, right? I mean, it's just Jedi mind tricks. She can be doing something outrageous and have no good reason for it and somehow talk her way out of a ticket. When I was younger, we were in California. We were doing, or she was doing, I should say, 85 and a 55. The cop pulls her. She doesn't quite talk her way out of this, right? But by the end of this, the cop writes it up as, well, I'm going to write you up as doing 62 because if I don't write it at least 7 miles over, the judge will throw it out. I've seen in other cases, 15, 20 over, somehow get out of tickets. It's amazing. I don't know. I wish I could do it. I'm not bad at talking my way out of tickets. I managed to do it about half the time. I mean, I haven't gotten that many, pulled over that many times, but when I have. But my mom is just, she's got a lead foot, so she gets pulled. And she just always manages to talk her way out. I do not know how she does it. My dad, on the other hand, if he gets pulled, he's going to get a ticket. He's going to get a ticket, and he's going to get a ticket for every mile over he was actually over. That's not actually rude with the cops. I don't know what it is, but just every time he gets the ticket, and they don't cut him any slack. Think about that, though, right? My dad is pissed about this. And I think he's right to be pissed about this, right? It's not fair. There's no good reason the police should keep letting her out of her tickets and giving him his, right? Why do they let her out of her tickets? She's way more charming than he is, right? She's way better at handling people. But that's not a good reason that you should be let out of a ticket or get a ticket for a lower speed than you were actually doing, right? That is not fair. The very nature of police discretion opens this door to unfairness. People who are more charming are going to get tickets way less often than people who are less charming, right? I wouldn't tell my dad that he's less charming than my mom, but he just does not have her people skills. That is really, really unfair. I agree with my dad, he has a right to be pissed about this, right? You know, if mom can talk her way out of tickets all the time or 90% of the time, I can talk my way out about half the time, and he can do it none of the time. Well, that's unfair, right? That's, being more charming is not on the same level as having the flu or having to get to some important thing. It shouldn't play any role in whether you get a ticket or not, right? But policemen are human beings. All of us tend to treat people who are more charming better than people who aren't, right? Well, but that ends up not being fair. And unless the police are just sort of supermen, which I don't see how they could be, well, it does seem like discretion here opens the door to unfairness. And there's a million, the ways that I think rightly upset us most are ways to do with race, and, income's probably a distant second. And I think we should be probably most worried about those. But if you think about it, there's a million ways that discretion is going to open the door to forms of unfairness. It's just the nature of the beast and the nature of human beings. And now look, a response I've heard people make. Well, if the person commits the crime, it's not fair to arrest them or gives them the penalty, be it a ticket or whatever. It's not unfair to you that you get a ticket. If there's unfairness here, it's that the person who doesn't deserve to be let out is let out, right? You might say to my dad, it's like, well, you have nothing to complain about. It's not unfair to you that you get a ticket for speeding when you're in fact speeding and your wife doesn't. If there's any unfairness here, it's unfair to society that your wife gets let off when she should get a ticket, right? You don't have any reason to complain. If anyone has any complaint, it's society because, your wife is getting treated too leniently, too kindly for breaking the law. The problem with this response is that there's actually two different things we can mean by fairness. And they're both actually pretty important, I think. There's absolute fairness, which just means, does the person deserve this? But there's also what we might call comparative fairness. Do we treat similar cases in the same or similar ways? Let me give you guys an example of this, right? Imagine that somebody doesn't turn in a bunch of their homework and they completely fail the final exam in their class. They fail it because they don't study. Let's say, they leave the test early to take a call, right? They don't even try. So they get an F. Well, but lo and behold, two of their friends are equally lazy, don't turn in their homework, also just blow off the final, and they both get C's. Now imagine our person goes to the professor and says, well, look, why is it that I got an F in the class, my friends got C's? And the professor says, well, look, obviously you didn't try very hard, you didn't turn in your homework, you didn't do very well on the final exam, your grade's fair. Student says, well, yeah, but my friends are just as lazy as I am. They blew off the final too. They got C's. Why is that? And the professor says, well, look, obviously, right, you blew it off, you're lazy, you admit you deserve it, right? But here's the thing, your friends, they always laughed at my jokes in class. You never did. You just kind of scowled. That makes me feel really bad. Didn't laugh at my jokes, and what's more, you were wearing a Cubs hat. I really hate the Cubs. I'm a White Sox fan. I really, really hate the Cubs. So, I thought I'd cut them some slack, whatever. I'll just, give them a C. But, with you, I just let you have the grade you earned. Is that fair or not, right? In my little imagined case, what the professor's saying is, well, you earned this grade, right? It's fair. But I think the student would be livid. I think the student would probably rightly report the professor to someone in this case because it's not comparatively fair, right? The imagined friends of this student are just as lazy, did just as badly in class, but they were treated differently. In a sense, this is fair. The person in my example earns his or her bad grade. It's absolutely fair. That's the grade they deserve. But it's not comparatively fair because people who've done just as badly have been treated better. And I think, very rightly, the person who's treated in this way would say, this is unfair to me. It's not just unfair to the other students who tried harder that these people are cut some slack. It's unfair to me because I'm treated differently for reasons that have nothing to do with what kind of grade I should get in the class. Whether I laugh at the professor's jokes, what baseball team I like, those are not good reasons to treat me differently when it comes to assigning a grade. So I use a case with a grade because, I've had students sometimes tell me, I don't care about comparative fairness. And I'm like, if you are any college student I've ever met, yes, you do. College students care about comparative fairness. I know this through so much experience. I've never been grossly unfair in the way of my example, but I say this, I try very hard to be fair. I've had students argue with me about a point. Students who've made an A even argue with me about a point on an exam, literally a point, because they're like, well, I gave the same answer as my friend did, and he got a 91 and you only gave me a 90. I have had that argument. So I know that college students care very much about comparative fairness. Don't tell me you don't. I will not believe you. So, and if that's the case, then we should worry that police discretion opens the door for comparative unfairness. So discretion very much opens the door to comparative unfairness. It is comparatively unfair. My mom never gets a ticket and my dad does. And I think my dad has something to complain about. It is comparatively unfair to him. And now look, my example is a kind of not super important, kind of funny one, but look, in the real world, race and income are going to come into this comparative unfairness. And we don't have to imagine, and I don't think we should, that police officers or anybody else are particularly racist or classist or biased, right? They are human beings, and little things are going to have an impact, right? If the cop pulls you over and it's easier for him to empathize with you, it's going to be more likely he'll let you off. And he's going to have an easier time empathizing with you the more like him you are in background and whatever else. We don't have to suppose awful, terrible motivations on the part of anyone here. Police officers are human beings. Human beings are just going to think in these ways, right? A lot of little stuff will come into this that people won't even realize is important, right? If someone's listening to music you love, you'll think better of them than if they're listening to music that you absolutely hate. Well, think of it this way. What music people listen to, there's at least some racial component to it, right? Cop pulls the person over, they roll their window down. What are they listening to? Are they going to be listening to something he likes? Again, just a possibility, just a toy example, pretty minor, but I hope you guys can see how this can come into it, right? How police discretion, without ever supposing that the police or anyone else has bad motivations, can open the door to this comparative unfairness. No cop, I think, ever thinks, I'm going to stick it to Ron Duncan. Ron's my dad's name. But he's treated unfairly because my mom knows how to play on their sympathy much better than he does, right? No one ever sets out to treat him unfairly, but he's treated unfairly. And I think this is a symptom of the very way that discretion opens the door to this. So there's a very real worry that police discretion is not fair. It does not fit with equality. Citizens are going to be treated differently, by the law based on factors like race or income, or even if it was something about how charming you were, right? That doesn't fit with liberalism either, treating the charming people better legally. That would also be a worry, even if that were just the case. Also, in much the same way, police discretion opens the door for individual police officers to impose a vision of the good life on people. And we don't even have to suppose they're doing this consciously, right? If the cop pulls you over and you say, "Why are you speeding?" And you say, "Well, I'm an elder at First Presbyterian Church, and I'm late for we have a pastor search committee, and I'm late for that, and I just want to be a good elder for the church." I'm going to bet that the policeman will be way more likely to let you off than if your answer was, "Yeah, I'm on my way to a magic tournament. The prize is like $500. Also, being awesome at magic is the most important thing in the world. Magic, being a card game. I don't play it anymore. I did play it when I was a kid. Yes. Along with the Star Trek, I have a very nerdy background, right?" Most policemen I know are going to be way more likely to let the elder off than they are the person on their way to a magic tournament, right? Well, but that's imposing a vision of the good life, right? It's saying it's more important to be a good churchgoer than it is to play magic in your spare time, right? That's a vision of the good life. The cop probably never means to do that, but it happens. Or to give you guys an even more blatant example, in my hometown, little southern town out in the Appalachian, very far southwest Virginia, look, if you were to have, say, a pentagram or like some kind of pagan or Lord help you, other symbol the cop thinks is even more demonic on your car, you are going to be way more likely to get pulled than if you don't have anything on the back, right? I know, the pentagram is not necessarily demonic, whatever. It can be a symbol for lots of other things. My point is, certain religious commitments displaying them, I'm going to bet in Hillsville, Virginia, will be way more likely to get you pulled than no statement whatsoever, or a generic statement of, say, Christian commitment, right? Again, discretion allows police officers to impose a vision of the good life on people, and it does so in a way that the police might not even be aware that that is what they are doing. Finally, the biggest worry here, and this is what I'm going to spend the whole next lecture talking about, is that this flies in the face of the rule of law. The police are not having to follow rules, or you might say the police are getting to choose how the rules are applied and interpreted. The worries about imposing a vision of the good life are a big one, and I don't think we should neglect them. An even bigger one is equality before law. But fundamentally, there just seems to be something that doesn't fit with this idea of rule of law. Everyone follows the same rules, and police and other people get to choose how those rules are applied and enforced. We will talk a lot more about that in the next lecture.